right now. I just put the video on. You will find it on Obviously on Some's page.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining us. This is Gilbert Crispin. I am a board member with Obviously on Some. I'm going to let Rudy in a minute introduce himself, but I thought we'd start with a little background music prior in lieu of our title, Money, Cash, Zoes. So that was just to get us warmed up. If you're familiar, if you are a fan of hip hop and you heard that, that was an ode to the original song. So again, I'm Gilbert Crispin, and we are here. Rudy and I are going to be talking all about Money Cash Show. So Rudy, please introduce yourself, and then we'll get started.
Yes, so I am Rudy Jean Bar. Just happy to be here with my guy to really have a conversation that we have all the time via WhatsApp and voice notes. I am a person who teaches African American history and American history at Broward College. And then also, just because I think it's relevant, I will be soon having a podcast called Black Money. That will look at a holistic approach to money in the Black community. So happy to do this with my guy.
All right, thanks so much. I'm just ecstatic that we're doing this. Like Rudy said, we've been having these conversations for a while, and we're extremely passionate, both of us, about money and how it affects Black people and Haitian people specifically. So I guess the one thing I want to say before I ask Rudy to talk a little bit about the history of money, my personal belief is that if you are not talking about economics, you cannot be talking about the advancement of Black people or Haitian people. I feel like economics is tied to every aspect of our lives, to everything we do. So when people want to talk to me about progress, if you're not talking about economics, I generally don't want to have the conversation. I just really don't know that it's fruitful to be talking about one without. So Rudy, if you could please talk to us a little bit about the history of money. And we have two things happening right here in this present time. You have white supremacy, which has always been happening, right? You have systemic oppression and racism, which has always been happening, institutional racism, but now you have COVID, which is another pandemic. So you have these two pandemics working in tandem to do a number on the Black community and on the Haitian community. So I'd really love for you to just talk to us a little bit about the history of money and Black people and Haitian people as you see it.
So I think one of the things, there's several different components, right? And it's really, really layered. As far as Haitian people, let's start there. I think that one of the things that we have to be mindful of Haitians is the revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and really its economic importance, not only to Haiti, but also to America. It could be argued that there is no Louisiana Purchase without the Haitian Revolution, right? Napoleon is not going to sell that territory that really has presence in about 15 modern day states for $15 million, which is just extremely, extremely, extremely low prices, and beyond bargain prices. Considering the acreage, it was like about literally like a penny per acre about, right? He's not going to sell it without the losing of Saint Domingue, which of course became Haiti. And one of the things that is the reason why I bring that up as a topic of import is because one of the connections that I want us to make this evening is the aspect of Black bodies being seen as valuable, but yet the sweat equity of Black people not being able to generate the value economically of which it deserves. So if you so a perfect example is this: the notion of there being no Louisiana Purchase without there being Haiti, right? Without the revolution. And yet we know that when Haitians were coming to America, in particular Miami in the 70s and the 80s, even going into the 90s, that they often were caught on shore and then sent back to Haiti, is really ironical considering the importance of Haiti and its revolution to the very existence of America. If there is no Louisiana Purchase, there probably is no expansion westward in Manifest Destiny. And if there is no expansion westward in Manifest Destiny, there probably is no California. And if there is no California, there is no Levi's and there is no Wells Fargo. So a lot of times I'll tell my students, If you look at Wells Fargo and Levi's company, you got to thank Haiti, because they created a product valuable to that specific market. Levi Strauss creating jeans that will work for the gold miners. Wells Fargo creating a banking apparatus to help those gold miners and others as well. There is no Levi jeans and also Wells Fargo without Haiti, right? Then we have to take a look at the reality is that in Haiti, and then Haitians coming forward, because of the classism and colorism that exists, we've also mitigated how much we can earn collectively as a people, right? When the money itself is not being dispersed equally and evenly, or at least with more sense of equity than it is, then you're going to limit essentially the value of that income. Why do I say all of that? Because now we find ourselves as Haitian Americans in America, and it's very similar to the aspect of the African American. The slave labor that existed for 246 years, in America for Black people is one in which produced an enormous amount of wealth. There's a great book that people definitely should read called by Rata Rani called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And there's a great line in it where he says that the relationship between developed and underdeveloped is dialectical in that they are depending upon the other. If you have hyper development, it is at the behest of hyper undevelopment. If you have massive wealth in America, it is because there are people who are massively underpaid and undervalued, especially i.e. Black people in America as it relates to enslavement. And yet still, the African American spirit was one in which going into the 20th century, people like O.W. Gurley, along with J.B. Stratford, finding a plot of land, and then building with their own hands in Tulsa and Greenwood, and expounding upon that, and then creating what became known as Black Wall Street, speaks to the incredible tenacity of Black people. And so I know this evening, one of our objectives is to kind of build some asset framing, right? To speak about the brilliance of us as people, as Haitian people, as Black people. I have a very Pan-Africanist mindset, in the spirit of Malcolm X, a Black nationalist mindset economically, where I believe that we as descendants of African people need to work together around the diaspora as well as Africa itself in order to generate potentially generational wealth and even cultural wealth. And then lastly, I'll say this, because I don't want to talk all this time, but I love the subject. I'll say this, that quite often people have commodified Black bodies at the expense of Black people. And one of the things I know we're going to talk about is, in order for us to own space, we must own ourselves. And before we can own ourselves, we must own our thoughts, as Gil would say. So there's a lot to discuss and dive in, but that's just a little bit of a synopsis of some historical context for us to consider as we go into this dialogue.
So I appreciate that, Rudy. I just so love sitting back and listening to you, kind of explain what got us here. The last thing you said about owning space, and Rudy and I had a conversation around owning space before we can own ourselves, or owning ourselves before we can own space. And I think it goes even further, like you said, owning our thoughts. And we have to really think about how we educate ourselves and the system that we're allowing to educate us. So we're allowing a system to educate us that doesn't really teach us about finance or economics. So in no capacity are we learning finance and economics in the way that other cultures, other races do. So it becomes hard to own anything down the line. So I think it definitely starts with owning our thoughts, owning ourselves, and then owning our spaces. Now, the one thing I will say, and Rudy knows this about me, I hate the word wealth as it relates to Black people. When people say things like, well, we got to close the wealth gap, we got to think about generational wealth, Black people don't have any fucking wealth. By and large, Black people have no fucking wealth. I think it's like $1 to every $10 that a white person has. So when you think about that, there is no wealth. I think that the conversation, at least for now, we have to really be thinking about money and building on something in hopes that future generations, that maybe our kids or our grandkids, can actually possess wealth. Because I think when you step back for a minute, and I shared this, when you think about wealth, are you, Rudy, thinking about it from a perspective, do you have a number? right? That says if I hit X number, I'll be wealthy. And is there any, what do you think about people that assess their number based on how they live? By that I mean, let's say you have $25,000 in your bank account, right? And your expenses are $2,000 per month. Now that's without changing anything, right? You don't change your standard of living. You still have your car payment if you have one. You still go out to dinner once in a while. $24,000, that's all you have. So if you were to stop working right now, right, and you take that $24,000 divided by your expenses, which are $2,000 per month, you have 12, your number is 12. So you have 12 months which you can survive at the very same rate. What do you think about that system, or thinking about wealth in that way, as opposed to having a specific number, like I want to have $500,000 in an account somewhere?
I think, you know how the saying is, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I think wealth is somewhat in the eye of the beholder, but then there are some tangible things to consider, right? So where we often look at wealth, people often look at it through the lens of liquid, right? How much cash do I have? Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why people think that is because we're not educated as much as we should be on assets. Mm-hmm. And there also needs to be said something about that capital is not just financial, that as a matter of fact, financial capital is a result of other capital outside of it, right? So if you're looking at a social capital where you're an influencer and you have the ability to have certain conversations that can therefore eventually generate financial capital, then that therefore means that you may be wealthier than someone who at that moment has a significant amount of liquid, but they don't have any ways to generate more revenue beyond their labor. That's very important for us to understand. The ideal for me, when we think about what is wealthy, and here's a perspective. The wealthiest Black person in America is not Oprah Winfrey. However, if you ask most Black people, they think Oprah Winfrey. That in of itself is problematic as it relates to the lack of education that unfortunately persists. So the guy who is the wealthiest Black person in America is Robert Frederick Smith, right? Who I absolutely love some of his mindset towards economics. Not saying holistically that, you know, I love everything about him, but I do appreciate what he brings to the table in that, firstly, he defines the stereotype that the way for a Black person to be wealthy is through entertainment. So I love the fact that the wealthiest Black person, and it should be stated, the wealthiest Black person in America did not earn it through entertainment. Correct. Also, the wealthiest person who ever lived is a Black man named Mansa Musa, right? And so that needs to be considered as well. So I digress.
I think before you go forward, Rudy, just to clarify for the folks at home, we're not talking about Fred Smith, owner of FedEx. This is correct. Robert Frederick Smith. I just wanted to clarify that for folks at home.
Thank you. Robert Frederick Smith, who is the founder of Vista Equities, right? Someone who has a wonderful educational pedigree. Not that I concern myself with that. But what did Goldman Sachs, and this is what I loved, he had the initiative to say, Goldman Sachs is paying me X amount of money, which is great, but I know I could bring a certain value to the marketplace because of what I've learned, then build Vista Equity, bought up a lot of tech companies and expanded upon that. And his net worth is worth over $5 billion. And yet I say all of that to say, Bezos has a net worth $100-some billion. So even what we as a people think is wealthy, in the grand scheme of other conversations,
another stratosphere,
is not quote unquote wealthy, right?
Right.
So here to me is where I think we should kind of redefine wealth, in that we need to look at wealth through the context of institution building, not just simple individual acquisitions, but what institutions are you building? If you have not built an institution, you are not wealthy. You could be a doctor and make $1 million over a time period because you get paid well, but you haven't built an institution, you're not wealthy. And here's one thing I also want to say too, to your point earlier, which is we need to stop looking at it through the lens of here and now and be honest and say, 100 years from now, where will Black people, Haitian people be? Because we got to think about it generationally. We are in the infancy. When Jews came to America, they didn't come with wealth, a lot of them. They started out working 18-hour days, being founders of garment companies, but they instructed their children to be educated in certain particular fields and then to own what they know. So you're not just gonna be a lawyer, you're gonna have a law office. You're not just gonna be a doctor, you're gonna have your own practice. And then they systematically, generation after generation, built semblance of wealth. We need to start thinking from the ground floor up. How do I build more quote unquote wealth or more income or more institutions and assets for generations to follow after me?
So I think that's really interesting because when we think about building, right, what happens a lot of times in Black or Haitian communities is people always say, well, we don't have money. We don't have money. And I disagree, right? I disagree wholeheartedly. I think that we don't have a collaborative dollar. We don't lack money.
Right.
We can't be the biggest consumers and spend the most money, in America. And then you turn around and tell me we ain't got money. I can't believe that. What we don't have is a collaborative dollar, right? So we don't have, if we have, I don't know how many people are watching this, but let's say we have 50 people on here, right? And all of us says, you know what? I can spare $200, right? I can spare $200 to go ahead and do this project. We got something there. That's 10 grand, right? That's 10 grand right there with 50 people, a small amount to go ahead and fund something, to go ahead and collaborate and do something bigger. So I think a lot of times in our communities, what we struggle with is these low entry point barrier businesses, right? Because we say, well, let's start something online, very small e-commerce. Maybe let's, open up a small shop or a small restaurant, something where it's only going to cost me maybe $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 out of pocket. And not always, but oftentimes when you start at a low barrier point, to get to these $1 billion and $1 million businesses, it takes so much capital. It takes so much more effort. Do we have anomalies that someone started something out of their garage with $1,000 and now they're a billionaire somewhere? Absolutely. But generally speaking, right? Our entry point, because we don't have as much access to wealth, access to money, because we're not getting these loans, because we don't have assets, right, to secure the loans. So a bank is more likely to lend me $100,000 because I own a home and because I have a job. However, if I am coming out of incarceration and I have this great idea for a business, I'm in trouble because I can't get a loan. Right? Or even if I'm earning $25,000, $30,000 a year, $12, $15 an hour, and I go to a bank and I say, listen, I have this fantastic idea, but I really need 75 grand to get it off the ground. They're probably not going to give it to me. So, we've had this kind of, crowdfunding that has happened. We've seen a lot of development from that, but I still think that there's a lot of room within our communities to build something. Within our communities to collaborate dollar for dollar for dollar for dollar and say, you know what, we can do something. If you have, and I guess part of this also for me always speaks to sacrifice, right? But what are we really willing to sacrifice, not only for ourselves, but for the next generation and generations and generations and so on? And I'm curious, and I know Rudy's answer, but I'll ask anyway. And this is for the folks at home. If I told you, you know what, Rudy? I need $1. That's all I'm asking you, right? And I'm gonna go ask another 999,000 Haitians for $1 because I'm gonna get this $1 million and I'm going to build an institution, right? And if I had a plan laid out, would you give me $1?
Absolutely.
I already know it. It's such a small sum of money, right? And I think that obviously there's a lot to unpack as it relates to why we don't trust sometimes, as to, why we compete against each other at times. All of that to me makes perfect sense. But the thing is, and I was talking to my mother-in-law recently and I said, we don't have time to unpack this shit.
Yeah.
We're falling behind further and further and further. we don't have time to unpack it. So a lot of times in the Haitian community, you have something that's called the ISO. And for those, and I'm going to let Rudy speak to it a bit, and then I'll chime in. So tell me your thoughts, Rudy, on ISOs, and tell me your thoughts really on, why you feel we don't collaborate as much. I have my own feelings about it. I'll share. And what even if we were to say right now at the end of this call, matter of fact, I'll make a call to action. At the end of this call, I will put $250 of my own money up to start a Black Haitian venture capital fund. So I'm the first 250, right? Period. I don't know how to organize it. I don't know what specifics we need. If somebody's watching this, tag Io Tillman. She's brilliant. She can help us out with that. But I'm gonna put $250 in some kind of escrow to start a Haitian Black venture capital fund, right? And let's see what we get. My money might sit there forever and never accumulate another dollar. Maybe it will. But I'm curious, tell me what you think about ISOs as it relates to our community, what they mean for our community, and are they beneficial? And then I'd like to share my perspective.
Sure, but before I answer that, I want to go back on something you said, because I think it's really important as it relates to, again, looking at, I'm trying to find a different way to say wealth, because I know you don't like the word wealth. But looking at,
hate wealth only because Black people don't have wealth. But I
right.
love you, so go ahead and use it.
So here's what I was. So asset creation, right?
I like that. I can appreciate that.
So there was a Freakonomics, and this speaks to the importance of building institutions, right? So there was a Freakonomics episode that spoke about ban the box. So if you all remember, the thought is that for those who were convicted of a crime and were incarcerated, that the fact that they had to reveal their criminal record, it was a hindrance to them getting a job, right? And this speaks to a lot of our Haitian brothers and sisters, unfortunately, have experienced incarceration. So the thought was, okay, well, if we ban the box, then, more people who were incarcerated get jobs. And what the data shows is that the opposite happened. Less young people, men of color, got jobs. And the reason why is because of the fact that employers now had to guess whether or not someone had a criminal record. They then allow their bias to expand even more because they assumed certain young men of color might have had a criminal record. Therefore, they were less apt to give them a job. Which speaks to the fact that if more Black people, and particularly even those who have a criminal record, had businesses, that they could empower other people with employment, right? That's institution building, right? As far as ISOs are concerned, so I think about it in multiple ways. If I like how it works in a collaborative standpoint, in that you have people that are not familiar or honest with themselves about not being very disciplined when it comes to saving money. So that can be an advantage. The other advantage is the large lump sum aspect of it. So you're able to purchase certain things that you wouldn't have otherwise because of that, right? I think though my beef with it, but there's good, but there's also some bad. The bad part is it only is effective the more people are involved. And anytime you involve yourself with a lot of people and money, that could be very dangerous, right? That's one aspect. The other thing is that I think the next thing for the ESO, as far as its evolution to do, is to find ways to grow the ESO by having the money work for you.
Yeah.
If I'm just generating money around and I'm saying, all right, here's my $500, a month, putting it in the pot. We have other people doing the same thing, 100 other people doing the same thing, $500 a month, that's $50,000 ESO. But all we're doing is exchanging. Correct. All I'm doing is essentially giving my $5,500 in the year. And of course, that month, when it's my month, finally down the line, getting $50,000. But the reality is, number one, again, the danger in that is, what if people fall by the wayside? Right. Then people end up having in some situations. But then secondly, it's not earning anything. I think the next iteration of the ESO needs to be, how do we gather our money invest our money and have it grow, so that way there's even more than we've put in. Because all you're really doing is getting back what you put in. That is not a profit making entity. And I think that's something that needs to be considered. If people have issues with saving money, and that's another thing too that needs to be discussed, which is, unfortunately, in a lot of our communities, they're what are known as, we know about food deserts, but they're what are known as banking deserts, right? And if you have a lack of access to go to a bank and be able to deposit money, and you have a lack of access to go to a bank, then you find different ways to save your money. And therefore the ESSO almost becomes a necessity for certain people. And I think that's the thing is, when are we going to get to a place where Jimmy rigging the system isn't our necessity, right? When can we get to a place where we can soundly invest money and watch it grow and not have it impact us, you know, where we have to find different ways in order to Jimmy rig the system in order to have it work for us?
So I want to speak to ISOs really quickly, and then I want to take some questions for some folks. And then I'd love to poll the participants. But, you know, ISOs for me, I've never participated in one. It's not something that I believe in personally. I think it's a circulation. I understand it from the standpoint of waiting for a big lump sum. But to your example earlier, 100 people, that's 100 months, right? So what's that? 100 months, 12 times, that's almost 10 years. Am I right? I mean, about 8 years. So I'm waiting 8 years. Now, if you were to take that same $500 a month and invest it for 8 years, at a return of, let's say, something really light, 4%, you're talking 32% more plus compound interest. So you're walking away with that at probably $132,000 on the low end. 100. So you're walking away. If you think about the math for a minute, you would have a third more. You'd have about 30% more money than you do going at it alone, and you know, some discipline than you would going at it in this group session. Now, I like it if that group puts their money into something with a committed timeline and says at a certain time we're pulling it out. And I also understand that, right? When you are an immigrant to this country, you do what you know how to, and you do what you have to do to survive. So I'm not knocking it, but I am saying that in 2020, in 2019, and 2018, you know, as the children of immigrants, as maybe, you know, first generation Americans or second generation Americans even, we, with the tools we have at our disposal, we should be able to elevate what our parents learned and take it to another level. So if you're a participant here, we would love to hear your feedback on ISOs. So if you want to unmute yourself, please feel free to chime in and share your thoughts. You know, the other thing, someone made a comment, and there's no one chimes in, I'll keep talking. Someone asked in the chat, what does sacrifice look like? And that's such a deep question, but I'll give a short answer and then I'll let Rudy chime in. For me, sacrifice looks like I'm going to work doubly hard to pay my house off sooner so that my kids have an asset that's completely paid off, right? I'm going to work doubly hard and save and invest consistently, not only from the day they're born and prior to that, but I'm going to invest consistently every extra dollar I have, so that when I'm dead and gone, maybe I can leave them with $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in addition to a house. It looks like maybe me not taking, you know, for folks, any folks that know me, I love to travel, but maybe sacrifice is different for all of us. So maybe that's me not traveling 3 times a year and cutting it down to once, and taking that money that would have been used on travel and using it to fund, you know, either education for my child or to fund an account for them. So I think sacrifice looks like different things for different people, but in short, it looks like not necessarily getting all of your wants met and focusing primarily on your needs, so that future generations can definitely have their needs met and possibly their wants.
I think for me, sacrifice is choosing to focus on the addition more than the inconvenience. I'll say that one more time.
Please.
Sacrifice is choosing to focus more on the addition than the inconvenience. No one sacrifices for deficit, right? So therefore, if you're sacrificing, the expectation is that improvement is going to happen. So if that is the case, you're committing yourself to the improvement more than you are allowing yourself to be occupied by the inconvenience, right? And I think that's the one of the big things is we need to start looking at addition not only through services rendered and also investments, but also addition through reallocation. So what Gil talked about is a perfect example of reallocation. If he has a certain amount of money and he takes three with his money, he spends it on three different trips, and then the following year he decides, instead of spending on three different trips, I'm going to cut it down to one. But now that money that he used for two additional trips is still there. The question is, what is he going to do with that? And if he can find a way to therefore take that trip money and maybe even start a small business venture or invest in the stock market, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit as well, or some other aspects as it relates to investment, then he has his money working for him rather than the other way around, right? One example that comes to mind as it relates to sacrifice, Gil and I are part of a book club for Black men called the South Florida Marathon Book Club. And one of the books that we recently read was The Richest Man in Babylon. And in the book, it talks about how 70% of your earning can go to your living expenses, 20% going to your debts, but then 10% you put away and find something for it to do in order for it to earn money. So for me, what that looks like is putting it in the stock market, right? And I should say this. I recently got in the stock market, investing for so long, and I think a lot of people may be able to relate to this. I was very apprehensive. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of that apprehension came from a lack of education. And I think a lot of people look at stocks as like gambling, and it's not the same thing whatsoever. Can you lose a lot of money in the stocks? Absolutely you can. But what I will say is you also can be educated on it. And I think what got me in there was I talked to my wife and said, look, we're very fortunate. I'm an educator, and so therefore I'm a part of a job that is someone in demand. So therefore I'm pretty secure, but I'm not banking on that for the extended future. That's another conversation for another day. She was going through real estate, having a string of deals, what she was doing well. So the thought was, what do we have to lose, right? We're going to invest money that we will be comfortable with losing. I do recognize the privilege in that, right? But I also want us to think about how can we create some aspects of privilege. And so I educated myself, right? It wasn't like, at first it was like, yes, I'm just going to invest in some travel stock because they got to come back. And then I did some research and started really, really being mindful of where I invested. And since May 6th, since I got the portfolio looking the way I want it, I've made 36% more off of what I initially invested in 2 months, right? And
so I want to jump in one quick second. Rudy, I just want to separate one thing. What Rudy said was 36%, right? And I want to stop there because oftentimes in our community, and I learned this, I started investing in the stock market when I was in college. And one of the things I learned is a lot of times we talk about dollars, but not percentages.
Correct.
Right? And we have to shift the conversation where we're talking percent and not dollars. For example, if you had 1,000, let me take it to a lower number. If you had $100, right? And you took this $100 and you put it in the bank and you let it sit for 12 months, a really, really good bank would give you maybe 1%, right? Rudy took the same $100 or whatever he decided to invest, and he's made 36%, right? So he now has $136 to your 101. So I just wanted to stop. I didn't mean to cut you off, Rudy, but I think a lot of times in our community, we focus on the amount. Like, oh, well, I could, what's 36%? I can make that, doing nothing. That's $36. That ain't nothing to me. Oh, cool. But what you're not factoring in is that had you had 10,000, right, you'd have a lot more. Had you had 100,000, you'd have a lot more. So when we focus on percentages, it helps us realize where we can actually go as it relates to investing.
Absolutely. And here's another thing too, right? And again, what was key for me getting, that rate of return, because that's not necessarily a normal rate of return, was I educated myself on specific companies to invest in, right? The other thing though, and I'll give you another example, perfect example, as it relates to seeing every single dollar as an entity of asset creation, right? Every single dollar, what is it producing for me, or what am I getting back? So for example, I have to get gas no matter what, right? If I have a car, I have to get gas. What I never did, and what we often do is like, we'll look for different gas stations, hoping to get the cheapest gas. And then I signed up to Get Upside. And what Get Upside does is essentially gives you some money back for every participating gas station. And there are many of them. It's an app. You find a gas station that participates and you get some money back. You may get $1 back, some cents back, whatever the case may be. But literally, I connected it to my, I connected to an account. Let me say that I connected to the account and I got a couple $100 in a year's time from the gas that I pumped, was able to therefore utilize that money to then invest in my podcast. And that's not coming from my family. That's coming from me pumping gas, right? So there's myriad of ways to add on through reallocation. And if we look at every single dollar as a means of asset creation, right? And again, assets, expanding that definition to being a myriad of things, then you can understand how there's value to that, right? So when I take the 10% of what I get paid and then find it in ways to invest more stocks into certain things, or maybe eventually after a certain amount of time, there's another company that's a strong buy that I want to invest in. That's from me choosing to no longer, let's say, go to the fast food restaurant as much, because now I'm saying I gotta put away this 10% in order to go and put it into investing in stocks. So we gotta think about reallocation as a way of adding on as well.
So a couple of things I wanted to say really quickly. Understand that whenever doing any kind of investing, you can win big, you can lose big. And I don't even want to say win. You can do well, you can do poorly. And I want to take a step back and say Rudy's 36% is really not common, right? Obviously, we had a lot happen with COVID, so a ton of stocks just tanked and then a ton rebounded. So in that time, you could have very, significantly made, a nice sum of money. Also understand that unless you take your money out, you're not realizing a gain or loss, because that 36% could also shift tomorrow, right? And be negative 18. So I just wanted to clarify that, only because two things Rudy mentioned that are really important: research, right? So it's important that you know where exactly you're putting your money. The second thing that's really important is understanding that, for many people, it can be a really slow go. I really love what you said about reallocation and these things, that finding ways of using life, things you do every day, getting gas and saving sums of money to build something further. I want to go to the comments for a little bit. Someone said we should recruit the older generations along, since we know that Haitians are still working and acquiring income, and pool that money. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is, it is paramount that we include older generations and really help them understand what we're trying to do, and help them support our initiatives, and help us support them. Because, for many of us, we're going to be taking care of our parents. And if you're not in a position to do so financially, get ready, because it's not cheap. Someone else said right now, businesses are eligible for SBA loans can leverage those dollars to build generational wealth, since they may not have gotten capital in the past. So Iman, I love that. The only thing I really don't like about your comment is you use the word generational wealth. I hate the word wealth because Black people don't have any fucking wealth. But other than that, Iman, I really appreciate your comment, and you're right. Someone said, Ludmilla said, our community is too risk averse. You know what? It's interesting. I think we are risk averse, but I think less than being risk averse, we're not risk educated. Because we take risk in quite a bit of things.
Yes.
We just don't, we because we're not educated on a certain risk, we stay away from it. So I think that if Haitians by and large were extremely educated on the stock market, they would take the risk. But I do understand where you're absolutely coming from when you say that. There's another thing, and I want to say personally, in my personal story, I've made a fair amount of money investing, and I've lost a ton investing. I always say that to caution people, that you have to be willing to ride it out. You have to be willing to be patient, and you have to be willing to educate yourself. Because there are good days and bad days. Right? So it's important to understand that.
I want to quickly say, an ESO is a risk.
And ESO is a risk,
right?
That's a good point.
So it's not that we are risk averse as much as we are more willing to take risk where we are educated, to your point.
Absolutely. And I also want to take the time to say, Alvin Assam will be having a 4-part money series coming up in July, beginning July 8th. It's going to be phenomenal. So please sign up for that and ensure that you're ready to talk all about money. And in case anyone ever wants to know the amount that I lost, it's a pretty large sum, but it's not something that I actively think about. I think the one thing that I always want to say to people who invest is don't invest anything you can't afford to lose, right? If you're gonna, be feeling like somebody kicked you in the gut or you just got out of a 12-round fight, then don't invest that money and start slow. One of the things that comes up often in our community is real estate, right? So real estate versus the stock market. You hear this conversation often. There's good, there's bad. Tell me what you think, Rudy. And full disclosure, Rudy's wife is a realtor. So if you need real estate services, please reach out to Amarel through Rudy, and they can definitely help you find the home you're looking for.
Yeah, and also she is beautiful, but she's my wife. So whoever, be mindful of that. But she's beautiful and intelligent and extremely skilled, and she's working also with a team of Black women, some who are Haitian, some who are not, Black women realtors. So that's an example of institutional building. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to shout out my wife for those things. I don't see it as an either or thing as much as a both and thing, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, again, however we can view the dollar as a way of asset creation, I think though there are two things that really the main thing that causes loss of money in both entities is a lack of education. So there are people who are like, oh, all I gotta do is buy property and I'm good. No, you're not, right? And then there are people like, all I gotta do is invest in the stock market and it's gonna work out. No, you're not. It's about being diligent in the education. If you were to ask me what is more likely to build wealth over a sustainable period of time, my opinion is investing wisely in the stock market, right? I would say
we share that opinion.
Okay, yeah, the same. Yeah. So one of the things I need people to understand is there's a reason why when people look at quote unquote CEOs and Fortune 500 companies, part of the negotiation and even part of what is known as their parachute package, which means that they pretty much been fired or let go or retired, whatever the case may be, are stock options. One of my favorite examples is there's a Black man, and again, this is something that we need to do too as a community. We need to expand upon educating ourselves in Black people, Haitian people doing phenomenal things in non-entertainment capacities. Yep. I remember talking to a group of young Haitian men, actually, specifically. And I was like, y'all know who Lil Wayne is, right? And everyone was like, yeah, we know Lil Wayne. And then I had a slide. I said, y'all know who Stanley O'Neal is? And they were like, no. I said, okay, well, Stanley O'Neal's a Black man. He went to college, got a couple of degrees, and he ends up being the CEO of Merrill Lynch. And in the midst of the '08 crisis, he got some blame for some things. He wasn't a horrible CEO, but mistakes were made, whatever. And his parachute package, meaning we are firing your ass. I'm gonna say ass since you say no fucking but.
Absolutely.
We are firing your ass. His parachute package was worth $161 million.
Golden
Many
parachutes,
of which
y'all.
was stock options.
Correct.
Meanwhile, Lil Wayne, who's working his ass off, making a gazillion mixtapes and records, and people who know him everywhere at the time, his net worth was like $95 million estimated. Whereas you had a hard evidence to say that this was the package that Stanley O'Neal received. Correct. So I would say that that's something to be considered. I think another thing when it comes to buying property that's a little bit concerning to me is I'm seeing a lot of Black people doing like a collaborative property buying, which is fine, but you should be mindful of how many of you get involved. If too many people are getting involved, you are limiting your profit margin, which therefore doesn't make a lot of sense, because again, you are inheriting some risk. No matter what you do, you are inheriting some risk. So therefore, your risk should generate great reward, right? And so if I had to choose which one works well, especially over an extended period of time, because one has to take into consideration, if one buys property, and my wife is not only a realtor, but also a property manager. So if you have property that you own, and you need someone to help manage it for you as far as dealing with tenants, and you don't have to worry about that, she'll do that for you. So I am plugging her. So therefore, Amber, you got to be happy with me. That's all I got to say. But she therefore is a property manager, and I've seen this with her. So I'm gonna put this out there, baby. I hope you don't get mad at me. Tenants don't always pay, y'all. So you're getting a property, and then you're hoping that this tenant essentially pays, and there still is some aspect of you working with that person. Meanwhile, one company I invest in is a Chinese company called Tencent Holdings, right? It's the biggest social media apparatus pretty much in China. They made money today. They usually make money, and they are slated to make a lot more money coming forward. I've never spent a single minute on Tencent, never went to one of their meetings. I never did anything for Tencent, and yet I'm making money off of a company I don't have to work for, right? And so that's one of the other advantages as well. But I think the key component for both is education. You gotta be educated on it. Now, there's some people like the racist Donald Sterling, who made his wealth via real estate, but he also did it via being a slumlord, right? So there's just different things to take in consideration, but I see it as both and. Be educated, however you can make your dollars work, make it work, but be educated and stop being in fear, so that you can find smart ways to invest your money.
So I want to talk a little bit about this, and then I want to go to the comments, because we have a lot of comments. Thank you so much for everybody who's commenting. Someone said, our community just doesn't know where to start. This is overwhelming, especially when everyone around you is struggling. So, I agree with you, Nancy. The struggle is real, and it does feel overwhelming. I think the only thing I would say to that is, investing, at least in the way that Rudy's speaking of, and in the way that I'd speak of, a lot of times it's autopilot. For me, when I invest, I don't even see the money. It goes straight from my paycheck right into my investment accounts. It's not even something I touch. It's not even something I think about. Another thing I'd say about that is that, like Rudy said with Tencent, think about also, you can also think about things you use every day. Colgate makes tissue paper. They own a company that makes tissue paper. They make toothpaste. They make soap. They make everything. I don't see a world in which we're not going to be buying those goods. So it's also important to think about knowing what you're investing in. I, Io Tillman is a brilliant woman. I'm gonna just shout her out. And she said something to me that made so much sense. She said, be mindful, because sometimes with real estate, you're buying a job and you don't want to buy another job. What you want to aim for is independence. So I really think that's important to think about. Someone else said, how do you build money? How do you build wealth or asset creation when you have ridiculous amounts of student loan debt? That's such a really good question. And, the only thing I can offer in that regard is, one, see if, there's anything you can do in terms of refinancing that debt, and I won't speak to that because I'm not a professional in that arena, but that's just what I would do. But the other thing I would do is seeing if there's any place where I can cut back. Sometimes your only solution is to cut back to make inroads going further down the line. Let me see what other questions we had here. Hold on one second. Also, don't forget to sign up for Avalanche Some, like us on Facebook and Instagram, so you get all of our notifications and when we're doing things. Iman said real estate is another risk, but manageable, because you need to consider property managers, contractors, tenants, applications, licenses. There's a lot to consider. You're so right about that. And she said stock options equal the corporate safety net. It's a really good point. Ebony, my lovely wife, said some people don't think investing in real estate is the best use of funds. Instead, invest in the market. What do you both think of that? I think we just touched on that, babe. I'm for investing in the market. I don't have the money to own, 20 Amazon shares outright because they're $1,600, $1,700, but, and maybe more, I haven't even looked, but I own pieces of Amazon. I own pieces of Apple. I own pieces of Microsoft. I own pieces of UBS. So, I own little bits of everything. I think the market has been, good to me. We didn't get any questions about cryptocurrency, but a lot of people might be thinking about that. Be very mindful. It's something that's extremely volatile. I lost a ton of money. So just be aware of what you're investing in. I wanted to chat a little bit about, as we get more questions. So Rudy, you talked about Pan-African economics, and you and I talked about that, and I want to make sure we have time, but talk to me a little bit about what Pan-African economics means to you.
Yeah, so first of all, Ebony is the homie. I just want to say, he said, babe, he sounded real affectionate, so you got to be happy with him too, Ebony. I'm just saying. So here's what's, in explaining this, let me explain my interest in money as it relates to, and funny enough, my interest in money actually came from me being a history professor, right? It is not even that I am money hungry as much as I try to be a strategist. And I think money is a part of, I think the key missing strategy in us moving forward is Haitian people and Black people in general. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar with Pan-Africanism in general, Pan-Africanism was a term used essentially explaining the bringing together of African people as well as people of the African diaspora, meaning your Caribbean people, which we of Haitian descent are, meaning your Afro-Latin people, meaning your African-American people, in any way and everywhere you are Black, focusing on that as the unifying factor first and foremost, and building from there, right? And so economically, what that looks like to me is to, number one, when we are talking about this whole blackout thing, I think people are focusing a little bit too much on where not to spend money and not enough on where to spend that money, right? And also not seeing it as a holiday. Oh, look at me, I'm spending money at a Black business on July 7th, but more so of making that a lifestyle, exhausting the possibilities and seeing, does a Black person own this thing that I'm looking for? And then seeing if you can therefore invest or buy from that particular Black person, but then looking at that from not only a local lens, but an international lens, right? I would love to see more people invest in Caribbean people and African people in general, and having really an international infrastructure of Black support. So an example would be, if I give you an example. There's a woman I recently met who I was on a panel with. She had gone to Colombia some months ago, and she was working with a Black group woman collective in Colombia, who now have been adversely impacted by COVID. This Black woman therefore decides to do a GoFundMe account in order to help these Black women and Black families in Colombia. And me donating, my business donated $50 to this campaign, and that $50 is able to feed several families, right? Because in Colombia, $50 is able to travel a little bit more than it is here in the States. That is Pan-Africanist economics in my estimation, right? What would it look like for Virgil Abloh, who is the designer or lead designer of Louis Vuitton, who is Black? But how would it look like for him to work with African designers and say, let's have Louis Vuitton and African designers have a collaboration? That's Pan-Africanist economics. When we gotta think about Black first in how we spend our money and how we generate that particular asset creation and essentially generate all these entities, right? And even if it's a mindset, because one of the barriers that people have and thought is, oh, well, we find ourselves, Black people and Haitian people, that you go to their business and it's not the greatest, blah, 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 blah. Look, I know that there are Haitians doing phenomenal things. They exist, right? But you got to change that narrative. As well as we need to be able to add the educational component to our business owners, so that way they could be more inclined to generate more business for themselves. All of those things to me work as what I call Pan-Africanist economics. And we got to think about that. When we're looking at Creole Essence is an excellent example of Pan-Africanist economics, right? The idea of the founders being here in America, but working and being able to employ people in Haiti in order for product creation, that is Pan-Africanist economics.
I really appreciate that. I think one of the things, well, I put a question up on the screen. I hope everybody can see it. And the question says, what do you think the biggest barrier to creating wealth for you? What do you think is the biggest barrier to creating wealth for yourself? And do you think that barrier also exists for the Haitian/Black community, or is it different? I just wanted us to really begin to think about our relationship with money in the last 30 minutes. And as it relates to buying Black, one of the things that I really want to talk about is we need to think about how sustainable is buying Black. I tell the story of us participating in the protest recently, economic protest, and us looking for a florist and not being able to find a Black florist and not being able to find a Black market or grocery store or farmer where we could go get our eggs from. So one of the things that I propose is us looking at saying, well, you know what? I'm going to spend, of every $10 I spend, I'm going to spend $2 on a Black business, right? And I'm just going to make that routine. I'm actually going to have, instead of a savings account, I'll have another savings account called the Black savings account, where $2 of every $10 I earn automatically gets diverted to that Black savings account. So what I can automatically do at the end of the month or end of the week, I can see what's in my Black savings account and allocate it directly towards Black businesses, right? In a way that I'm not in this hole where I'm looking around, like, what can I find? Let me run in a Black restaurant. Oh, no, if we make a conscious effort, right? And I think 2 out of every $10 or 20% is enough that it makes a larger impact, because we're still buying some of these things we need. Maybe we have time now to look online for a Black deodorant maker. We have time to look online, for a Black jewelry maker or a Black, cell phone company. So I think I'm really thinking of, as I think about Pan-African economics, making a concerted effort to taking money, putting it in an account, and spending it specifically on that, as opposed to this last minute kind of rush that we get into, and we ultimately don't end up spending money, or we just go to a restaurant that may or may not be Black owned, right? Because we don't know that they're always 100% Black owned, right? And we're not really asking these questions when we pull up. It's like, all right, cool, it's a lot of Black people in here, it looks Black owned, feels Black owned, great, this is good. but that's not always the case. So I think we really need to be thoughtful about the research component as it relates to that. So I'll ask, you, Rudy, and I'll ask the audience at home, what do you think is the biggest barrier to creating wealth for yourself? And again, I hate the word wealth, but it's necessary because Black people don't have no fucking wealth. But you know what I mean.
So I think one for me was a lack of education, which I'm eliminating. And then the other is too often connecting my labor with wealth creation, right? So again, trying to work at a place where, and that's my son in the background, y'all. So sorry for any noises that you may be hearing. But trying to get to a place where I don't have to work per se in order for me to get paid and get money. And I think that what we need to do a better job of, and by we, I literally mean we, as in I am a part of that, is creation of systems. So that way, even when you're creating a business, your goal should not be to oversee that business forever. Your goal should be to be able to create a system in which it is run so well that it gets to a place where you're able to therefore walk away from it and still make some money. I'll give you an example. Recently, I had some conversation with some people from Chen Medical Center. They reached out to me. They were interested in what can they do more to help the Black community. And in learning a little bit about the Chen Medical story, what I recognize is that the founder of it is an older gentleman now. He every now and then he'll oversee some stuff, but he's not working day to day whatsoever. And Chen Medical Centers now started in Miami, and now it has facilities in South Florida, throughout South Florida, but also in Chicago, Virginia, and a myriad of other places. He built a system, and then eventually it generated into massive asset creation, right? And then one other thing I think we need to think about too, because you using the florist example made me think, because I actually know a guy, my family are real cool with, Gardell, who has a wonderful garden in Brooklyn. And a lot of people want his property and his business because it's in Brooklyn. Now that's so funny how that became really valuable. And so he's someone who is Black and therefore ideally will sell flowers, right? But it's about having more of that so we could do that locally. And I think that too often we connect our business to what I call cultural competency, right? We think, what would our people buy first?
Correct.
And sometimes we got to think, what will people, period, buy? And I will be an asset to my culture as I'm able to generate even more asset creation because I've made a product that is admired by many, right? Circle House is an excellent example of that in Fort Lauderdale. I love bringing
to Circle House Coffee. It's a coffee shop in downtown Fort Lauderdale, owned by a Black man, former Miami Dolphin, I believe. Really great guy, amazing place. Please go ahead.
Right. So one of the things to take into consideration is when you go into the environment, there's nothing that says, "Hey, this is Black owned."
Correct.
And it doesn't mean that one should assume it's not. The point I'm making is that almost everyone I know that goes to Circle House loves Circle House, right? Because it's an amazing, it's a coffee shop that has a different feel from most and offerings that are different than most. And so we got to talk about how do we find various ways to generate businesses that can be one that have cultural competency that speaks to us, but also can be expand upon those borders as well.
I appreciate that. A couple of things are interesting. Circle House I love Circle House, right? It's beautiful, it's amazing, everybody's so kind. And the thing that always kind of throws me is that shit, every time we talk about a Black-owned coffee shop, we only say Circle House because it's the only fucking one. So I just wanted to point that out, which is amazing for him in that he's garnering all of this Black business when it comes. But I think there's another point to think about, right? I'm one of those people, I'm gonna put it on me and say, I'm not the best at buying Black owned in that I'm not disciplined enough. So I live in Pompano Beach currently. I work in downtown Fort Lauderdale. Now I'm working from home, but when I was working downtown Fort Lauderdale, I would go to Circle House, sans issue. But now, or when I'm not around, I'm not going. I'm not making the drive. And as Black people, that's probably what we need to do more of. Commit and sacrifice, somebody mentioned that earlier, to saying, I'm going to spend this money here. Or I could have my 20% Black dollar savings account and just go once a month and give it all to them. So I think we have to be more creative. Somebody asked something, well, a couple of things. If you are a participant on the Zoom call, please raise your hand if you have a question. We'd love to hear your questions or comments. Somebody mentioned, thinking about Black buying, but the supply chain not being Black. I struggle a lot with this. Because, I was having a conversation and, you're not buying Black, but you're still supporting Black. And it's tough for the supply chain to not be Black, to be very honest. I'm a former owner of a beauty company, and 90% of what we bought was not from a Black-owned company. And I'd probably venture to say 95. It was so difficult to get glass bottles and pumps Black-owned. I was getting them from Asia. You know what I mean? It was so difficult to get oils, essential oils, carrier oils. I was getting them from Asia. Now, the money was coming to us. We were two Black-owned partners. So obviously, we the money came to us as a Black-owned business, and we attempted to spend some of it with a Black-owned business. So it's a really tough bag, Ludmila. That's a really great question. And that speaks to us controlling the supply chain. And to really do that, I think we have to speak collaboratively, right? Because if we want to control the supply chain, I think we have to start, first of all, with a certain thing, right? We can't just say we're about to control every supply chain out there. I think we have to say, well, what supply chain do we have access to that we can actually, I don't even want to say control, but produce a lot from that supply chain and begin to make inroads there. I think that's really hard. Another question, go ahead, I'm sorry, Rudy.
No, I was gonna say, and this goes back to the need of an international understanding of cooperative Black or African, Pan-Africanist economics, which is, because as you're talking, you're right? So often the thought is, let's go to Asia, let's go to China to get supplies for across the board, right? And yet, unfortunately, Africa is the poorest continent in the world, but we know a lot of that had to do, again, read Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And 19 of the 20 poorest countries in the world are in Africa as well. All heartbreaking statistics. The point being, then therefore, wouldn't that make Africa an ideal place of supply creation, right? If we're talking about the idea of being able to save costs, but of course not doing it in a way that's manipulative of our people. Correct. But more so to say that, look, $1 in America goes a whole lot different than in Haiti, as an example, right, or in various places in Africa. What does it look like to find or have a movement of supply chain creation in Africa, in Haiti, in the Caribbean?
So I want to just jump in one moment and say, I agree with you wholeheartedly, but not for the fact that China, as of late, has dominated several countries in Africa and attempted to invest into them and divest from them.
Absolutely.
So no, but I'm joking a little bit, but I just want.
No, but it's accurate though.
No, it is accurate, but I think your point is well made as it relates to what does it look like to setting this up. And let me say this: Africa's not. Sometimes we talk about Africa like it's not. There's 50 plus countries in Africa.
Absolutely.
So there's plenty of room for us to attempt to create supply chains.
And that is where there's explosion of both GDP.
Correct.
And also population amongst young people.
And just to say, GDP is gross domestic product.
Thank you.
I want to just make sure we identify.
No, you're right. Thank you. So Africa is potentially a gold mine. The issue is other people know that, but us quite often.
Yeah.
And so if there's a way in which, so someone earlier in the comments also made mention of the role that policy plays, which I think is a brilliant point. But we can't always control policy, but when we can, we need a lot of, this is what we need to do. When our Haitian politicians are, or prospective politicians are telling us that they want us to vote for them, we need, the first question needs to be asked is, how are you going to grow money for the Haitian community in our local neighborhood? Yeah. Don't tell me it. Don't even, the first thing, what is your economic plan?
Yeah.
On how you're going to generate more revenue, more jobs, more business creation, more financial literacy in our community. And I say that because when African leaders also have that mindset of collaborative economics and not being easily bought, Haiti's an excellent example, unfortunately, of politicians easily being bought, right? If the mindset is, as a people, we demand to know what is your economic plan and start from there, then we can be wiser in what we do with our vote. We should vote, but we gotta be wiser, and we gotta put the feet to the fire on our politicians and policymakers, because too often they're able to give way to white companies, whether it be in America, whether it be in Haiti, whether it be in Africa, where people who are not representing our race and our culture are generating profit off of our labor and our consumership. And that is a problem.
Yeah, I definitely think that as it relates to politics, I mean, Ebony and I, give quite a bit of our dollars to politicians, and I'm coming for y'all. I'm just letting y'all politicians know, when the day I don't have a bed to sleep on, I'm coming to y'all house and say, remember when I gave y'all that $500? So expect to see my face knocking at your door, and you better have a bed for me. I'm asking for a refund. But I do want to say, somebody asked a question about wealth. Why don't, so I'll just say this. I joke a lot about the word. I think the issue is not wealth itself. I think we need to really think about whether we are seeking to gain access to something or whether we want to acquire things, right? Because if you want to gain access to wealth, you can't constantly be acquiring shit. It just doesn't work that way. Especially if you're acquiring, I'm sorry, the chat's lighting up. Especially if you're acquiring assets that typically operate at a loss. So if you're switching up your car every 2 to 3 years, unless you got it like that, the wealth ain't coming. I'm sorry to tell you, it's not. If you buying houses left and right and you got one kid, you just had a kid on the way and now you upgraded to a 7-bedroom, the wealth ain't coming. So I think we really have to assess, what access to something looks like and whether we need to acquire as much as we do. I always say, I don't believe in buying, assets that can't help me in some way, shape, or form increase the dollars I bring home. And I will also say that I operate at a deficit because if I don't work, I don't eat. And I think Rudy said that earlier. My biggest goal, more than wealth, is to be in a position whether I work or not, I'm still eating. So to answer someone's question as to wealth, that's really the biggest thing. I think we need to differentiate because you can be wealthy and still be a slave to what has made you wealthy, right? So it's important that we separate that and think about, okay, how can I become financially secure? Because for a lot of us, we're financially insecure. Which brings me to another question. For you, Rudy, what is your biggest fear about money?
I also want to, before I get to that one real quick, I want to address that question the person asked as well. Mm-hmm. In that one article that you and I have loved and we haven't even mentioned yet.
Correct. So we haven't mentioned it. We need to put it in there.
Yeah.
Send it to Amaral to ask her to please post it.
So I'll briefly mention a certain aspect where Nicole Hannah Jones wrote this amazing, did I say amazing? Amazing article in the New York Times, June 24th. But definitely it's there. Sam Morrell, if you just Google Nicole Hannah Jones article, June 24th or something of that nature.
I'm gonna share it now.
Okay, cool. And in that, what she talks about is the idea that white folk, you have to understand in America, and I am going to use that word because that's the word she used, was able to make generational wealth because of policy, right? Homestead Act, as an example, the Federal Housing Administration, there's a whole history behind that. The other point that I want to make, though, is that if, again, dialectical relationship, if there's massive development, there had to be massive underdevelopment. If there's massive generational wealth, there also has to be massive generational debt. And that is something that isn't discussed enough, is that too often we've created generational debt. I think that for me, and here's an example of that. When you are a part of a family that has generated nice asset creation, that means that you don't get phone calls saying, oh, I need $4,000 for this emergency. Oh, I need $800 for this. Part of the reason why we end up not being as economically secure as we want to be is because for some of us, we end up giving money to our family members because they're not economically secure. Right. And when you find yourself in that position, it is limiting how much money you yourself have, right? I think for me, the greatest fear of money when it comes to that is just not being able to, again, being too dependent upon my labor for it.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to be the case. Being able to expound beyond what I thought. You know, growing up in Miami, I didn't anticipate growing up that I would be a college professor, right? I'm someone who literally had a high school teacher tell my dad, when my dad said he's going to college, looked at him puzzled, you know, with a puzzled look and asked, he's going to college? And now I'm a college professor, right? Mm. And not only a college professor, but several accolades, right? Mm. I didn't imagine myself being there. So for me, the next thing is to be able to accomplish business-wise, I don't even imagine it right now, right? And so therefore, I think that is the thing can I meet my aspirations, or better yet, can I meet my potential? And I think that's the same across the board, whether it be money or not money. When it's all said and done, when it's my time to no longer occupy this earth in the physical, will I be able to say I was able to meet a good portion of my potential? And we got to see our money like that as well. Our money, there's potential for money to be made. Correct. But if we don't invest in that potential, then we're not going to be able to withdraw from the result of that, right? That's the last thing I'll say on that is again, thinking about it as your withdrawal capacity is dependent upon the deposit capacity. Yeah. If you deposit a little, you can only withdraw a little. So if we haven't invested greatly in ourselves, you're going to only withdraw a little bit from yourself when it's all said and done.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think, speaking for a lot of people, I think some of the fears around money is always, I don't have enough. You know what I mean? Or I don't know exactly what I can do, with the little bit I have, and I think the one thing, we don't talk enough about it, but I want to say something's going to be having a money series where I'm sure they'll talk about the art of budgeting, because it really is an art form. It really knowing where every dollar is going, and not just where, but why it's going to said place. One of the things that I want to touch on briefly, and I wonder whether people do this. We had some conversation in the chat here, and I apologize because I hadn't been tuning in. So Claudine Modesir said, why are we not a tight-knit community such as the Cubans? We need to support each other, give back to our community, getting people into great positions / jobs, for promoting businesses. This is the ultimate question. So Claudine, that's a fascinating question, and it's a whole big answer. So I don't know if we'll get a chance to touch on it today, but please follow us on Facebook, and we definitely like to try to answer.
Can I give a quick answer to that?
Yes, please.
Because we don't know who we are.
Mm.
So, and it's true, because people often do the comparison of Asians and Jews, right? Because those are the model representatives.
Specific, and even more so financially.
Absolutely. I need for the audience to understand that the most educated group in America are not Asians, are not Jews, but are Nigerians. Nigerians are the most educated group in America. You could look it up, if you like to. 17% of all Nigerians in America, of course, an academic age,
correct,
have a graduate degree. That is unheard of. In the Asian community, it's 12%. Why do I use a Nigerian example? Because they're from Africa. They do not see themselves, rightly or wrongly, we could say it's arrogant. They do not see themselves as an enslaved people as it relates to dealing with that history. And also they see themselves coming from a country where everyone is Black. Therefore, you're not believing in the myth that your race prevents you from being brilliant. And they have a cultural gathering understanding that generates expectations.
right.
What we find is that because we as a people have been disconnected from our African origin, but I will say this, in my opinion, no group is more connected to its African roots in all of the diaspora than we as Haitian people are, right?
That is accurate. That is accurate.
So I'll say that. But because of our revolution, we were punished, right, economically, with embargoes, endowment payment, all kinds of things. That's another history to go into. But the point I want to say is, too often as Black people, whether Haitian people, African-American people, Caribbean people, Afro-Latin people, we want to be the HNIC, and we see each other as competition rather than co-builders and collaborators.
Correct.
To collaborate simply means, it's from the Greek word, and the origin simply means to co-labor, to work together. Yep. If I'm going to collaborate, we are working together, right? And becoming one. And the reality is, as long as you continue to work by yourself, you are limiting your asset creation capacity because you don't have all the answers, right? So once we understand our culture, once we understand that it makes sense because we are a people of revolution, so it makes sense for our dollars to work revolutionary, then we can get to a more stratified place where we work together and collaborate and then be able to generate more assets.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, and a short one for a pretty, a pretty big topic and a big question. I think that's something that we're constantly having to deal with that we won't ever really figure out in a day. But I think, the biggest component there is collaboration. And I spoke to that earlier in that we don't lack money, we lack a collaborative dollar. And clearly, based on what Rudy said, we lack a collaborative mindset. So that's important. I want to go, to the chat or to the questions as we get ready to start, winding down. Someone said Africa is a gold mine, but Africans don't have control over those assets. Absolutely right, Miller. It's sad to see, but it's absolutely, contributed to the wealth of others and not to the wealth of those actually doing the work. Similar in the way that it has for Haitians and for Black Americans and other African diasporas. So that's really something we need to think about.
But I do want to, again, I want to speak to the asset framing as well. There's a guy in Africa named Tony Elemolu, Tony, last name Elumelu. He's an African man who found ways, generated a lot of capital for himself in the banking industry, and now he's been investing in African entrepreneurs. So we got to be mindful that yes, though there are parts of Africa that are really owned by foreign, especially in the case of China, by foreign entities. Yes, though there is some poverty circles or places in America that are predominantly Black, there are Black people doing phenomenal things, but we don't know about them. And if we knew about them, then we can kind of mirror some of the things they do and then add on to what it is they do. Just to give strength to Gil's point. If all the Black people in America, this is statistically speaking, decided to leave America, and let's say with all of our assets that we have, true story, and found some, I don't know, some nation that had not been inhabited as of yet, we would literally be a top 20 economy in the entire globe. True story. But the fact that we look at Black people through a lens of deficit and poverty speaks to the lack of disbursement. But if every, because I gotta say this part too. I see people, black players in the NBA talk about, I don't know if I want to play. These owners need to give more money, and what are they going to do for the Black community? And they're not holistically wrong in that. But these Black players also got money themselves. And the question is, how many of them are investing in the Black community themselves? And if every single Black person in the NBA and the NFL said 10% of my money is going to go into asset creation for the Black community, you going to tell me we won't be further? Correct. Right? So it's possible. We got to disperse the money.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rudy, wholeheartedly. It is absolutely possible. We can all do more and do better. And you know, again, I keep saying, listen, I put $250 up in the chat for the first Haitian Avancé Ensemble, you know, venture capital fund. So anybody want to join, we'll figure it out. I don't know how it's going to work, but I have my first 250s in there. If y'all want to see me put more money, I'm happy to do so. But I think it has to start with us. You know, one of the things that I often wrestle with is, you know, how are we viewing money different than our ancestors, than not our ancestors, than our parents or our guardians above us? You know, speaking for myself, my family never really talked about money. You know, we did okay. You know, it never felt like we were impoverished or didn't have anything. We did all right, but it was never a conversation. And I wish it fucking was, because, you know, I could have started investing a lot sooner. I could have started thinking about things a lot sooner. And, you know, there's a level of grace that I have to, you know, give to my mother, because she did what she knew best. You know, she learned from her parents. But I think, you know, I really want to give kudos to Avancé Ensemble, and please follow them and like them, because we're talking about topics. I think in a week, Avancé Ensemble talked about money, sex, and politics. Within a 7-day span, Avancé Ensemble, this organization that really is, you know, the people who follow and support it, covered politics, sex, and money. That's unheard of in the Haitian community. The politics part, we will cover that. We'll talk about politics all day, but we won't talk about the fact that money actually drives politics. Yes, politicians want your vote, they want your support, but the first thing they're gonna come do is knocking, can I get some money? So for you, Rudy, how are you viewing money differently than your parents? My parents, I don't even know, to be honest, that my mom ever invested. I just don't. So for me, investment is a first generation thing. My mom did, you know, buy a house. My grandmother bought and owned homes. So that seemed like, and I wonder if that was more as an investment, or if it was more out of necessity and desiring a place to live.
So my dad.
Side note, let me stop for a minute, Rudy. We got $1,000 committed to the first Avancé Ensemble venture capital fund. So that's my 250 and then 3 other people, I imagine, or I don't know what the money was. You can put what you want and you get the, Rudy put his hand up. That means you in. So
yeah, we in, man.
I just want to say before you go, and I apologize to cut you off, Rudy, you have to understand that $1,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money, but $1,000 in the right business,
absolutely,
or in the right vehicle,
absolutely,
can go really fucking far.
Absolutely.
And for me, 250 is nothing. But my grandkids eating off of that first 250, that's something to think about. And that's the sacrifice that I think we need to make. So please go back, Rudy, to how you view money or how you view it different from your parents.
And really quickly, when we say venture capital, it has to be understood, right? It is not just about asset creation for oneself, but more so also investing in other people. Correct. And then having them create assets that we therefore are the benefactors of.
Which right? is the system, the system that we speak about building.
And again, asset framing, there's a group called Harlem Capital that is a venture capital firm that has about capital 40 plus million, I think more.
About 40.
Founded by a young Haitian American man who went to Harvard. So these things are, it's not like they don't exist. They exist, y'all. We just got to be mindful and educated ourselves. And don't worry, we'll talk more about that also in the podcast of Black Money. I'm definitely going to have Gil as a guest to chop that up. I would say this. My dad is, man, a great dude. And what he taught me was the value of working hard, but he also worked in the education arena, which I ended up doing myself. He was more the administrative side of the house, me being an educator. And he's really taught me about the importance of being wise with money. But what he's not familiar with is investing as well as entrepreneurship. That's not his lane. So for example, when I explained to him, I'm gonna, be a founder of my own podcast network. And he's like, how do you make money off that? Like, that's not the language he speaks, right? He doesn't know about advertisement. He doesn't know about Patreon. He doesn't know about guest spots and various other things, which is okay. But what that therefore allows me to say to my son is, all right, you're going to learn the value of education because that is generational. My father, his grandfather taught it to me. I teach my son the value of education, but that next level from my son is about entrepreneurship and investing. So my goal literally way before he's 10 years old is for my son to own his own business, right? Whatever that happens to be. I don't give a damn if it's selling lollipops, right? The notion of we went to BJ's and bought X amount of lollipops, and then you sold them to someone in the neighborhood or people in school, and then you were able to make that profit, and then you don't take all of that and just use it to spend money on games, but more so on investing and buying more so you can therefore generate more. And then how do you get your friends involved so you feel like you're running a corporation? So by the time that my son is a teenager, he is in position to say, I know what it is to run a business. So then when he becomes an adult, it's already second nature, right? That's what he knows. One of my goals, and I never really spoke this out publicly, but I'm going to, at the very least, I want to do more than that, but the very least, the bare minimum is by the time my son turns 18 to be able to say, here's $250,000. Mm-hmm. $250,000, you can decide to utilize that money towards your education. You can decide to utilize that money towards asset creation as it relates to businesses, or you could do both and, right? But here's $250,000 for you to build on. But by that time, it wouldn't just simply be, here's $250,000, son. It would be, you have learned the game. We have walked through the steps of investment. We have walked through the steps of entrepreneurship. We have walked through the steps of asset creation. You are educated in these realms. Now, with that education, what do you do with this $250,000 that your parents gave you? How do you grow that money and therefore generate massive asset creation so you're ahead of the game, right? I'll tell you a quick story. My father trusted didn't have, and it really wasn't his fault per se, but it ended up backfiring. When you go to college, you have all these credit card companies that are there just waiting for you to get a credit card, right? And my dad said, well, in order to build credit, it makes sense to get a credit card, right?
Yeah.
Which is not all off kilter or off base.
No.
But his assumption was, you know, to be responsible. So therefore, I know you're going to only ideally spend what, all right. But then as I got to grad school and debt started piling up and I kept putting things on the credit card, my dumb behind thought that minimum payments were fixed. So I was like, oh, it don't matter. It's cool. As long as I pay the minimum and I can afford this $15 right now, I'm good. And then all of a sudden that minimum went up and I was like, I don't got it. Yeah. So one of the things I had to learn, right, was, all right, no, I ended up in massive credit card debt. And I then had to—
Just to interrupt you, you're not alone.
Right.
So I did as well. Yes, so go ahead.
So I ended up in massive credit card debt. And I made a deal with the bank in order to therefore work it out where it did damage to my credit, but not as much as it could have been. Mm-hmm. And we worked out payments, right? But now here's where my father's teaching came into play. At the time, I was an adjunct professor and I wasn't making much money at all. When you're an adjunct, unfortunately, you're not making much money at all. And at the time, I was an adjunct professor. And so with that money, now I was staying with my parents. And with that money that I was making, even though it was an exorbitant, I'll make sure to go to the payments, go to the credit card payment, until eventually within a few years, all that debt was gone, right? But what would it look like if we had a more comprehensive conversation on credit cards, right? That minimum payments does increase with the level of debt. And then also, what would it look like for there to be more investments and to be able to do things more so economically? So those are some things I want to instill in my son. And then he's going to learn some stuff because there's going to be some things created in his era that I'm not familiar with that I hope he therefore relays to the future generation as well.
Yeah, I mean, we got to wrap up here, but I do want to say, things to keep in mind that, somebody in the chat mentioned that elections aren't cheap, and they're absolutely right. Somebody talked about a rewards credit card. My philosophy, I don't think for the last 3 years, no credit card company has made a penny of interest off of me, not one. And I probably in the last 3 years easily spent, I don't know, $40,000 or $50,000 on credit cards, but none has made a penny of interest because I paid everything off. I almost have used it like a debit card. And I've only used it to attain miles. And I only say that because I think one day they're going to cut me off because they ain't making no money off of me. That's okay. I'll take that. But, be very mindful of credit cards because like Rudy said, early on in my lifetime, I got into credit card debt, not even early on, I mean, young 20s. So be very cautious with them as you use them. Speak to professionals and people who are really learned around credit and finance and how to not fall into these traps and different things you can do when you do get into trouble. It's really important. I think the last thing I just want to close with is shout out to all the people in the chat who have committed to put up their $250. We obviously got some money. If you're on the participants list and you committed to $250, please just reach out to Abotel via email or, and we can figure out a way to work it out. I don't know how it's going to work exactly yet, but I think I want us to begin to think collaboratively. I want us to be able to think, in a different way, maybe than our parents and our forefathers did. I want us to be able to work together. And I want us to be able to look long-term at something. I always say, when I talk to my friends about investing, I'm like, okay, let's go. Let's get at it. Let's each bring 10 grand to the table and let's go do something special. And they're like, well, first of all, 10 grand ain't no small money. Understandable and fair. The next thing they say is, when can I get it back? I'm like, man, we need, I mean, you could get it back in 2025, 2027, 2030. And they're like, nah, man, I need it back next month. And I'm like, well, we can't do anything. So we have to understand. Rudy mentioned the Jewish community earlier, and he mentioned the Asian community. Two of the things that those communities both really think about as it relates to money is time. The length of time that it takes, the investment that it takes, to really build something sustainable. So I encourage us to really think about those things. We got to get out of here. Rudy, I can't thank you enough. I'm going to say on some, thank you so much for participating in this conversation, man. Just if you have final words to the people before we
I
head out.
do. Again, Black Money, the podcast. I'm looking at an August launch date.
Awesome.
I already have another podcast called Life's Classroom. So please check that out if you're interested, Life's Classroom. But if you're interested in finding out once it comes out, Black Money, please email me at January1productions@gmail.com. January1, just the number 1, productions@gmail.com. And that is inspired by that being our Independence Day. The idea is I want for my company to be something that is liberating for our people, right? And another thing, lastly, just to that point that Gil made, I want us to kind of reframe how we view. Too often we look at where we should have been now in this point of our lives rather than where we can be eventually, and see 30 as a new 20 and 40 as a new 30 and 50 as a new 40, which means that if you are so worried about, oh, I can't get it right now, I can't get it right now, and not realizing, think about it this way. If I invested and knew what I knew about investments 10 years ago, where would I be financially right now, right? But if I got caught up in, oh man, I need it now, man, I should have done that already, but I didn't do it, I need it now. I'm not thinking about 10 years from now where I can possibly be. Think long term. Those who often think in short term will not win in a sustainable way. Those who think long term typically win. And I'll lastly say this. I know we got to go. I'll just lastly say this. I'm a member of something called Motley Fool. They give some advice on, what stocks to kind of buy, this, that, and third. They make some great picks. Many of which I can't afford as of this moment in time. So I'm growing and building to that. But they showed that if you compare people who invested in the market and did not take their money out, just let it sit, ride the waves. And again, even though there's some waves that have to be ridden, you're still going to win more than you lose if you just let the money sit there. In comparison to those who just take the money out, or those who kind of take it out and then put it in and take it out and put it in, and those who just let it sit there quite often win. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't moments where you should sell your stock. There are moments where it's tanking and its future is not bright, right? But be educated on that. But I just want to thank people growing incrementally. Grow today and tomorrow and then forever, and the rest will take care of itself. And man, this is great, man. We have these voice notes all the time, so it's glad to see people, get to experience what he and I talk about all the time.
Yeah, I really want to thank Rudy. I want to thank everybody who participated on the Zoom. Again, please follow us at Avancing Some. We're on Facebook. I think somebody said write the name in the chat. I will definitely, Rudy, can you write in the chat to everyone? The January 1 production.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
In the
perfect.
Zoom?
Yeah, somebody.
Sandra did it.
Okay,
January
perfect.
1 production at gmail.com.
So I encourage you guys to find us, connect with us. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. You can find me if you want to chat with me. You can always email me, gilbertcrispin@gmail.com. Follow Avancing Some, plug in with us, share this video, go back and watch it, because there were a lot of names that you might have missed, a lot of things that you didn't catch. Really important dialogue. I will make sure to go back to the Facebook chat to respond to some of the questions and concerns. I can't thank all of you enough for your questions, for your comments, for tuning in. We really appreciate having you. The thing I'd just tell everyone before we close, think long term. If you're worried about investing and you have a fear of investing, talk to someone who knows a lot more than us, who's really, really educated. Talk to a financial planner. If you have, questions about debt, talk to a debt person who can really help you, get out of it in essence, and really help you make some headway. The other thing I'd say is, the Haitian community is very rich with resources. So if you need resources in the Haitian community, reach out to Avancing Some. I'm sure we can get you plugged in with someone that can help you navigate whatever path you're looking to navigate. And, other than that, I really just want to thank everyone for having this conversation, to be courageous enough to have this conversation Money's not an easy topic to talk about, but it's really important that we start having this conversation early and often with each other, with our kids, and that we're really planning and thinking long term. So on that note, again, Rudy, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. I want to thank Sancha. I want to thank Amarel for helping moderate. I want to thank everybody at Avance for making this possible. And again, that's it. We're signing off. We've kept you long enough.
And read Richest Man in Babylon.
Yes, really great book. And the biggest premise with Richest Man in Babylon, before we go, 10%. Commit today. If you do nothing from this conversation, commit to saving 10% of every dollar you earn, right? And do something with that so that it creates more money. And if you have more questions about, you know what, I'll actually do in the chat. I'll put up a few pictures, screenshots of my portfolio. Y'all can see a little bit of what I own. I'm not saying go invest, don't take advice from me. I'm not a professional, so don't try to, come up and run up on me when it's not working. But I am saying that I do want to show you guys a visual and that it is possible. Thank you all, Rudy. I appreciate your time so much, man. We know you're a busy guy, so thank you.
No doubt.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. And if you have any questions that we didn't answer, please drop them in the chat and we will try to get to them. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Peace.